Hello, everyone. My name is Gregory Q. Jenkins. I'm the founder and CEO of Quintasia Studios, and this is the Quintasia Podcast. Welcome. Today, we're going to do things a little bit differently. So we do have a returning guest today, and I'm sure many of you will recognize her. And I also have a special co-host today as well, and I'm sure many of you will recognize her. So with me today, co-hosting is I was going to try to say the word inimitable, but I knew that wasn't going to work. Here's the very special, the incomparable.
Incomparable.
Yes. Breton Tyner-Bryan, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. And
great honor to be here.
And returning with us is Jamie Zelermyer, and we're going to talk a little bit about NIWIF today, and also more, and even more excitingly is if you guys remember the last time she was here, she told us about a podcast that she was working on. Well, that podcast is almost ready, and we're going to hear some more details about that. So, Jamie, welcome back to our podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Interesting. We have Tribeca 2022 coming up. And there are, I think, because I just saw the email blast that went out, and I apologize, ladies and gentlemen. I'm hoping my voice holds out, but we'll do the best we can. I saw the email blast that went out, and I believe that there are 32 NIWIF members that are going to be a part of Tribeca 2022. And ladies and gentlemen, I am happy to say that Jamie is one of those 32. Your podcast is going to be a part of Tribeca. Before we get into more details about the podcast, let me just quickly ask you. So for those of you who may not have seen the first interview with Jamie, NIWIF is the New York Women in Film and Television. And it is, personally, I'm very happy to make their acquaintance, and, definitely recommend that you check them out. And I wanted to just start by asking, given the success that NIWIF members have had at Tribeca and other film festivals, what do you think? What advice would you give to new members who just joined NIWIF, or people who are thinking about joining NIWIF, as to how that they can make the most out of their membership?
Wow, there are so many ways to make the most out of a NIWIF membership, especially as we start to do a little bit more in person, or we will start to do a little bit more in person, I think, especially moving into the next sort of fall season. Amazing panels. We do, I think, for new memberships, new people to the organization, we have these virtual networking events, which I hope will start to become in person, and they're always partnered with another organization. So going to those is a great way to just meet new people. I think there are writers groups within NIWIF. We have the Writers Lab. If you're a woman over 40, submitting your script to the Writers Lab, which now takes features and television. We are definitely going to start to do more like all member meetings, which we used to do, these events in the fall. And we sort of had to stop doing those with COVID. Members have access to a lot of screenings So a lot of which are now in person. So going to those is also a great way to just be part of the business and to meet people. But we have summits. Participating in the summits is a great way. Going, virtually to Muse. Hopefully Muse is going to be in person. Our Muse Awards, our annual Muse Awards. We used to have a really big volunteer presence at Muse, which was a great way to be able to go to the event for free. I'm not sure how 2022 will look yet, so I can't speak to that. But there's just so many ways. The biggest thing I think is just being really open to or just having to just not have not set expectations and just really try different things, because I think the organization can really give back to individuals in surprising ways. I know it has for me. I mean, I've been a member for a long time, and I've been on the board of directors for 7 years. I'm always surprised at the new people I meet, or I don't know, just some new opportunity it gives me that I wasn't expecting. And I think just being open and just trying new activities and trying to meet new people through the organization.
Well, if there's one thing that I've learned, which, you would think I would have learned this a long time ago, but the importance of networking. You cannot underestimate. And it's not just, if you're interested in working, in the film and television industry, it's any industry. The importance of networking is, that's how I found out about you guys, through, an actor who appears in one of the films that we were distributing at the time. And she mentioned it, and I said, "Whoa!" And she had actually won an award. The Muse Award, and I started to look into NIWIF, and I said, "Wow, this is a great investigation." And then I invited you on the podcast, and you graciously accepted. So you never know.
Twice, Gregory. Twice.
Yes, this is your returning guest. Yes, that's right. And we're very appreciative.
We also have film, like Breton, you were saying that your film was as part of one of the festival type events. So, that's also a great opportunity. We have I think a couple, I'm not, although I am the chair of the board of directors, I can't speak specifically to every single program that we have because we have so many, but we do have various festival type participation, and also different types of festivals that we run or partner with people that are online at this right now, like online virtual stuff. So that type of stuff too is a great way to get your work seen.
Yeah, I definitely, be with your tribe, be with those people that are actively involved in doing what you love to do. I think that's the best way to find work for yourself, to find important connections for yourself. Yeah. So I would definitely highly recommend it to all of our listeners and viewers out there.
It's I would say it's a very warm group of people, and everybody is there for the same, everyone has the same goal, which is there's two goals. One is to help, and the other is to network and be helped. But it's all interconnected. And it is a tribe, I think.
Yes, absolutely. Definitely so. So let's pivot now, and let's talk about your podcast. Now, you talked a little bit about it the last time you were here. So I guess where I want to pick up is, why did you decide to tell the story of Marsha Mudd Ferber?
For a long time, I had been wanting to tell the story of my childhood, my parents were back to the land hippies in West Virginia in the 1970s, and they had moved back to the land when I was 10 days old to West Virginia, and bought land, because land in West Virginia was very inexpensive in the 1970s. And there were all of these back to the land, homesteading communities popping up all over the country, primarily in places where the land was cheap. and where you could get a lot of it, and where you kind of felt like you weren't going to be bothered too much, and you could, try something new. And I just have always found that part of my life, and also just that lifestyle, so interesting and also entertaining. Definitely was sort of the sex, drugs, and rock and roll time, but also just I feel like that time was filled with a lot of hope. They were dealing with a lot of the same stuff that we're dealing with, which was a corrupt president, environmental issues, wars that people don't really want to be in. And I always wanted to tell that part of the story. And I had thought about doing it as TV, as film, and, things are hard to get made. And at some point, I realized that Marsha's story was very interconnected with our story. She was my parents' best friend, one of their best friends. And also her story was very similar to my parents, in that she came from up here in the Northeast and moved to West Virginia in the 1970s and tried something new, and their political ideals were the same. But she sadly also had this story of her disappearance in 1988. And so it just felt like, which gave the story another layer also, but also had sort of been a big part of my teen years of her disappearing. And we lived with her when I was a kid. So it just felt very organic to combine the two stories. So we did. And that's why I had always wanted to do the time and place. The true crime part came later.
All right. We're going to take a little pause here, ladies and gentlemen. If for those who didn't join at the top of the podcast, you are listening and or watching the Quintasia podcast. And now I'm going to turn it over to Breton, who will continue our conversation. Take it away.
Hi, Jamie. It's a pleasure to be in conversation with you today. Your mom participated in making this podcast with you, which is amazing. And this was about a person you knew. Were you ever worried what you might uncover in researching what happened? And was there ever a point where you might have had any regrets about pursuing this story?
No regrets. I definitely, true crime was not in my background. I'm a film and television person. I had never done anything related to a disappearance or that involved talking to the police or to detectives. So it was definitely, it is open for investigation. I won't talk too much about it because I want people to listen to the podcast to, hear what we learned. But it was, we definitely learned things we did not know. And that was, we found ourselves sometimes saying, holy, the story was definitely bigger than what we had first imagined it to be. We never regretted any of it. I think we set out to tell a story that, because Marsha was so close with my parents, it was never the intention to go into it and do something that was true, just straight up true crime. We really wanted to tell to us, the life was just as interesting as a disappearance. And so I think we really tried to balance, have a good balance, and to really be respectful of her as a human being, and to tell a really honest, people are certainly complicated, and she was no different, but, I think you can be more than one thing at a time. And I think that's one of the things that we talk about a lot in the podcast. But the true crime part was hard. There's definitely, we never wanted to put ourselves in any danger. So we had to be really thoughtful about that. I'm not a detective. I'm not a police officer. I'm not, I'm just a person who decided to take on a story that had this angle. So we had to be thoughtful about that part for sure.
Just following up on that, was there any sort of time where you felt like this was a really cathartic process for you and your family?
Oh yeah.
In addition to it sort of turning into something probably much larger than you'd anticipated?
Well, I mean, my mom and I had, because it really is her story, it is our story, but it's really her story, and partially my dad's story and partially my sister's story. But I always felt like it felt very organic to do it with her as co-host. But we've been working on this for 2+ years, very closely. So it's a lot of processing. It's a lot of processing. So yeah, it was, I mean, I come from a very open family, so it's not like we didn't process and then all of a sudden we did process, but
sure.
It was a lot of time to spend in this space of understanding your childhood and how you were parented, or in her case, how they parented back then, and how all of these, just how this lifestyle maybe impacted the children. But I think that's part of what makes the story interesting, is this push-pull between mother and daughter in terms of looking at that theme of parenting. But it was great.
Amazing you're able to do that with your family.
Yeah, I mean, my mom she just turned 73. She's a young 73. But she had never made a podcast before. I mean, and she's a full co-host and creative collaborator, and it was great to work with, to do that with her.
Awesome. So just moving forward, the original focal point of the story was this back to the land movement. What do you think happened to the idealism of that era? And I say this coming from someone who's raised by urban hippies in the 80s. So,
oh, really?
So a different time period, but I have an affinity and appreciation for the exoticism of our childhoods and how they were just very much what we knew.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably a question for my mom, but she should probably be on this, but she's been doing a lot of the writing of some of the articles we're doing, and I've been doing more of the speaking stuff. It's I don't know what happened to I think that I don't know what did happen. I mean, there was a lot of hope, and there was a lot of risk taking back then. I think these are big questions. I think that's a question that we really try to figure out in the podcast. Like, how do we get back to that? And that was one of the hopes for the podcast, was that hopefully it will make people who are listening to it, it'll inspire them to, I don't know, do something you wouldn't have done, or big or small. Like, it doesn't have to be a big thing. Like, I don't know, like I feel like we're so careful these days. And even with our kids, it's like so careful. Like, are they in the right school? And do we live in the right neighborhood? And do we do this the right way? And are they eating the right food? And to just just be a little freer. I think what happened, if people grew up, I think, like in my case, my parents were really young. I think, I don't know, the world maybe just doesn't change that fast. A lot of the issues are still the same. Drugs, I think there's always been drugs, but I think for the kind of hippie movement, weed was really prevalent in the beginning. And then I think it got a little darker for some people. So I think there's a lot of different, but I mean, my mom's still progressive. She's still she's still on the streets. She'll still get arrested for civil disobedience if she needs to. So I don't think it's ended. It just shifts, I guess, it shifts.
I think that's an interesting point, just to talk about talk about age and drugs in terms of what was sort of at the beginning of that curve, and then where it went for some people, and just how that can change the tone. I was raised by hippie parents that live and die by folk music. And so I was wondering how you felt about disco. Just came to mind, because it's where did the idealism go? Disco came in, but disco also has it has a sort of different, it's an idealism in a different world, in a different way. Mm-hmm. It's a very club-based world. But I was wondering how you felt about that.
Parallel to that, I mean, different from that, but we were talking to somebody at one point we were talking about the sex part of it. And she was saying how AIDS really kind of squashed the free love movement. It's the same time frame and kind of in a way. So it's just, that's sort of, and that's not something I had ever really thought about, nor do we explore it in the podcast. But these things come up and they change the trajectory of whatever was going on. So obviously music evolved, AIDS came about, heroin and cocaine became more prevalent within the drug scene, which are just not good drugs for people. My mom will say like marijuana is an herb, like it's not a drug. She does not, they didn't think marijuana was a drug, and they never thought it should have been illegal. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of things, I guess, that just shifted it. I'm not sure it was one thing. I think it was a lot of different things.
Greg, do you want to jump in?
No, I'm enjoying the conversation. I thought that was an interesting take that you made me think back to a couple of things from that era too.
It's interesting. I mean, marijuana is legal now. Like, I have kids, they're 10 and 12. And like for them, it's going to be a totally different thing for them. Like they walk down the street and they see cannabis stores. And, my 12-year-old had to do an expert project for middle school. He did not do it on this, but he was kind of teasing, I think. I think he was prodding me, but he wanted to do it on the history of, or the legalization of cannabis, which I did not think was appropriate for a 12-year-old middle school project. But on the other hand, why not? Like, why is it's legal? Like, so what's the, at some point we're gonna have to move off of this taboo situation, this taboo thinking about marijuana because they're not going to think that it's taboo, because for them it's, but back in the day in the 70s and 80s, it was illegal. And a lot of people were dealing it in and selling it and growing it and getting into trouble. And that is part of our story.
Well, I'll just say I'll add this one thing kind of like an aside. Mm-hmm. So I happened to be in California on April 20th. Mm-hmm. I had no idea of the significance of April 20th. And everybody kept saying, happy 420. And I'm like, okay, good. All right. I don't know why this day is more special than 421, but okay. And finally, so many people said it to me, I had to go look it up and go, oh, that's why. And it is definitely legal in California now because I smelt it everywhere.
Yeah. It's legal in a lot of places. I mean, yeah. So I think, I don't know, things constantly are changing. I don't know, everything evolves and changes. What can I say?
Back to you, Brian. I didn't mean to disrupt your flow.
I love like this generational lens and approach that you're talking about this story. And today I think it's really interesting because you're not sort of talking about what your lens is on all this time, but each people who experienced it. But it has me thinking too of just my memories of sort of like the line of when I was, in the 90s when I was in high school, and what it meant if you were going to get caught with marijuana. Like that was sort of like this big, like, if you go here, you're into this whole other arena. And it's really interesting to think about the generation of your children sort of not having that tension as adolescents and as people that are like coming into adulthood or like partying socially. Because that was like a heavy, heavy lens for my generation, even though my parents were like, very, their generation was very blasé about marijuana, and it was never thought of as like this contentious moment between like law enforcement or, but I clearly remember those moments of like, it was like, who's going to get caught this weekend of the people mm-hmm. that I grew up with, or who's willing to go down that road. And then what are the consequences, and what are the consequences too, based on race and on gender at that time, depending on who was in possession and what would happen, if you were caught with the small. I remember I forget the numbers, but there were some, if you're caught with with this amount, you're looking at minimum 2 years jail time, and just it's really refreshing and interesting to think about how your kids are like, I'm doing a science project or a report at 12 about this, and how potentially they've moved past sort of that that contentious point, I think, on something
but we
that's
haven't.
used, that's used right, that's used like
we have to
medicinally
still
too.
figure out how to parent that moment, because it's still like, it's still hard to know like how to I don't know. It's hard to know how to parent around it, I think, because I think it's going to, even in the next couple of years, change a little bit in terms of how we see it and how the kids see it. And, because we're still kind of in the middle of it, I think, like of where it's going to be. So I think it's interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting to think about that. And I want, even if you have the opportunity to interview them, in 10 years, like how they'll speak about their childhood, especially considering how interesting yours was.
Well, my art for the podcast is a marijuana leaf on our art. It's a pink marijuana leaf.
I saw, it's beautiful.
And yeah, I love it. And my 12-year-old saw it one day. He was like, just passing by, it was on my thing. And he was like, that looks like a marijuana leaf. I said, it is. I can't hide it. It's like, they've listened to episode 1. They know the story. They've lived, cool. So I don't know, but it's funny, and I'm like, I don't like, they see it all over the city.
I think about that too, especially in New York. Like the trucks are like massively green and psychedelic, and like the sort of what's used visually to represent them is like so the opposite of what I grew up with, where like there might be like a private sticker on the inside of a jacket that signals to somebody, but you didn't have like, food trucks basically selling it on every corner in in Midtown at night, which is interesting. But yeah, very cool.
Alrighty. So most importantly, Jamie, tell us the name of your podcast and, when and where can we see it? Well, can we hear it, I should say?
The name of the podcast is called I Was Never There. It's premiering through the Tribeca Film Festival. But that is on June 9th, which is also the same day as our full launch of the podcast. And you can go on anywhere you get your podcasts, wherever you love to listen, whatever that is, Apple, Spotify, Audible. And you can go on right now and you can hear the trailer and you can subscribe. You can even rate and review the trailer. So June 9th is when it launches. And we have 8 episodes. I think it will be one a week. They may launch a few at a time in the beginning just to get it started, because people like to binge. And I'm really, it's a great story. I mean, it's a great story. I know I made it, but it is a great story. It's a lot of fun. And it was a lot of fun to make it. Podcasts are hard. It took 2 years to make, 2+ years to make.
Yes. Definitely know a little something about that. And, you're always surprised at, particularly how much work goes into preparing before we actually get before the camera. There's a fair amount of work that has to be done. And, but, we do it. And like we had in our conversation before we started taping, what I like about this is that this is forever. You put it out there. It doesn't have to be consumed, in one sitting. People can start and stop at their leisure. And, I find that, that's how some people consume, not everyone, but that's how some people consume it. That's certainly how I wasn't a big podcast person before I myself started getting involved with it. But now, I listened to a number of podcasts, and I Was Never There is going to be added to that list. Once again, that's going to be debuting on June 9th. So definitely look out for it. I had the pleasure of listening to the first episode. I'm hooked. I want to see what happened.
Thank you.
I want to see where the story goes.
And I want to add that I made it with a company called Wonder Media Network, and they are a podcast company. They're female owned. Their goal is to lift up underrepresented voices. They do a lot of political stuff around politics. They have a lot of other shows. They do stuff with Van Jones, and they do a show called The Accidental Activist and a podcast called Womanica. And they're just great. And I just want to shout them out. They really believed in the project and have been just incredible partners. And it was very fitting that my work with NIWIFT is a women-led organization, and then to make this podcast, which is really about a female protagonist, and then to work with a women-owned company, and our whole team was female on the podcast. All our producers and editors and executive producers are all women. So it felt all very fitting to. It all kind of worked well together, and it was nice. It was a great experience. So.
Absolutely. I'm sure they appreciate the shout out, and we appreciate hearing about them as well. So as always, Jamie, this has been, we enjoyed hearing about your project. Of course, hearing a little more about NIWIFT. We hope that as you go on in your endeavors, whatever you do, don't be a stranger. We'd love to have you back.
Can I also add that NIWIFT is having a spring membership drive?
Absolutely.
It's a great time to join, because I don't know all the details, but the initiation fee is either half off or not right now. And if you join now, NIWIFT we just raised our rates slightly for the first time in many, 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 many years, and kind of revamped what you get as social media has become a bigger part of our world, kind of revamped the membership benefits. So it's really worth checking out the new benefits and looking at this, looking at the spring drive information. We're really excited about it.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but even though NIWIFT is a women-focused organization, dudes like me can join too.
We've had men on our board of directors. Yeah. Not often, but we've had a couple men on our board of directors for sure. And when we were having in-person events, we always had male, men, and sometimes even the Muse Awards, like we have a Changemaker Award that can go to a male. So we are not all female, although our goal is really to lift up women in the industry. But it takes men and women to do that together. So.
And that is one of the reasons why I had an interest in the organization, because through the activism of some of my cast, who brought out issues of the how bad the inequity is in the entertainment business when it comes to female representation. And even though, not to talk too much about our show, but because of that, I know that we must have female writers in the writers' room to accurately portray the female perspective in our story. And it's no question about it, because of some of our casts, like Breton here, I think it's made the story a lot better because of their input and the things that they've said. So, but it just goes to show you that NIWIFT we're all about inclusiveness. And, that's one of the reasons why I love talking about that organization. So thanks for that membership drive. Don't forget, folks, and don't forget what we said at the top of this podcast: network. And I think that's a great organization to do that with. Breton, any final thoughts?
Well, I just wanted to shout out to everybody that's listening that I actually have Greg to thank for introducing me to this organization. So I think it's really important just to highlight how we all facilitate each other moving forward, especially women writers and producers and directors. So that again, it's a man who brought me to that organization, so that we all can help each other in that. But I wanted to ask really quickly, Jamie, because I I loved how the voices were cut in the first episode, and just hearing all these different voices speak about these characters. I thought that was so engaging and theatrical. And I'm just wondering if you're interested in developing it into a series or a feature, because it's so captivating, and it instantly took me to films kind of like Almost Famous, where I'm in that world and the story is told through all of those characters' observations. So yeah, I'm just wondering if there's anything that you'd
from
like
your
to do
mouth
with it
to
beyond.
God's ears.
Let's do it.
We are, we've had some people reach out to us, nothing definitive, and we are
awesome.
Kind of looking at who we would want to make it with, like who the right partner, because I think for us it's really important to tell this. I really I'm interested in a lot of things, but one of the things I'm interested in is telling a story about the 70s and 80s, but trying to do it with less cliches than I think often happen in storytelling about that time period. So it's just making sure, finding the right partner that sees the story as we do, that kind of sees the balance. But I think it would be a great TV show. But these things are hard. Any type of content is incredibly difficult to get made and needs a lot of guardian angels. But I appreciate that, and I'm glad that you were able to see it. We actually did a session at Hunter College. We went into a doc making class, and they said, and it's really not like I don't think not the audience that maybe would automatically come and listen to the podcast, and they really loved it. And they all, one of them said something like, "It's really like, did you mean to make it like a movie? Was that intentional?" And it wasn't. I mean, I think I do come from film, from that world, and I think so. I think what's so great about it is that we were able to accomplish that visual sense. And actually, I just listened to episode 4 yesterday, which we don't have up online yet. And I was, one of my things and it's in really great shape, and I really love it. And I said to her, and I said in my notes, I said, it's really visual. And it's just interesting to me how you can make something with audio that is also visual in its own way. And that was not intentional. The goal was just to tell a good story, but I think that's probably a really important part of these serialized podcasts is giving the audience a sense of what they're looking at, even if they're not seeing it. So I think that's awesome that you were able to walk away with that, because even less about making it into a TV show or a film, it means that it was a visceral experience for you as a listener. And I think that's, if we can accomplish that just as making a podcast, then we've done our jobs. And so that gives me great satisfaction, because it's hard to tell 8 episodes with no visuals. It's a very different type of storytelling. But if you can then get people to imagine what it's going to look like, it means you've done something. So,
well, I will echo that sentiment. I thought it was very visual. Yeah, I thought episode 1 was definitely you laid out a very visual a very visual story. And I think that that's the whole, whatever medium that we're using to do it, it's all about the storytelling. And, your craft was definitely on display as you did that. And I think people are reacting to that. So, I think this will resonate. I think there's definitely an audience out there who want to know about this.
Putting anything out into the world is very nerve-wracking, let alone something quite so personal. It adds a whole other level, or you're like, okay, well, if you didn't know me now, if you didn't know me before, you're going to know me now. And you guys only listened to episode 1, I think, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, there's some pretty, it's pretty raw, just the honesty and and some of the storytelling in a good way, I think, but it's very personal. So,
but that's what people respond to, because that's what they can identify to. They don't want the polished, studio version. They want something like, oh yeah, I can identify with that. I know. Yeah. And they appreciate the fact that you were willing to share this very personal information.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate that. That is just a nice way to, it's a nice way to think about it. And it just feels good to hear that, because it's when you put so much work into something. And also, I had never made a podcast before. So it's taking all of this previous experience of what I had done before, both in production and in development, because I have a production background also, and kind of putting that all into this different type of project, which is still storytelling. It's there's a learning curve for sure. Now I got it down, but it's a learning curve. So I feel like if the story comes through and it's visual and it's entertaining and it makes sense, like we've done our job, and that feels good.
Jamie, I would just echo that. I mean, I was hooked in the first 10 to 20 seconds on episode 1. And I'm not a person that likes to sit, because I come from a dance background. So for me to be, and I'm a very visual person too. So to have it happen just with sound for me, I think is just like amazing. And I can't wait to see where it goes. And I think what's so brilliant too is that you're talking about something, you're making something from the past visible, but we also get to journey with you and your family in present day, your experience of it. And I think those two things aligned is what makes it so special and not cliche. And we understand, like, there's an emotional, attachment to the story and why you desire to look at that. And I think, like, making the personal visible is always is challenging, but is the thing to do. And I'm reminded of that as a writer and director myself. That's kind of what I'm doing at this moment. And it also, I think, is like the thing we need to do for ourselves. It's just, we don't always realize it, that we want to tell the story for that person who it's about, or the characters, but that it is so helpful for us as well. But I think it's brilliant that we're getting sort of this double journey, your journey along with all the other people that were surrounding that person. And the fact that it sort of goes from 70s through 67 to 80s, I think that's so interesting to me. Because I'm always sort of taught, I'm like taught, this is what the 60s look like, or this is what the 70s or the 80s. But to hear this person's story and what they were doing in clubs and how they got to be, because I've met those people before in bars, and to realize that they're not just that snapshot of them working in that moment, that they've had if they've been parents or, all that journey for women through time, I think is really important to say these days. I would put it that way. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. I can't wait to see where it goes. I'm sure it's going to go very high.
Thank you. Thank you.
So to our audience out there, you really should, and hopefully, by now the way we do things around here, we do not heap praise upon people who are not worthy. We are not pretenders here. If we don't like something, you will definitely know it. But we honestly, truly, and genuinely like this project. I was never there. You should check it out. June 9th. It's going to debut wherever you get your podcasts. Jamie, thank you so much for taking the time once again to sit down with us. It was a pleasure. As always, we've learned a lot. Thank you, Breton, for taking the time to be our co-host today. On behalf of both Jamie and Breton today, I am Gregory Q. Jenkins. I want to thank everyone for tuning in, and bye-bye for now.